Episode 162 of the Marketing Lyfe Podcast. This is Taylor Timothy, your host. Today, guys, we're going to be talking about getting more content ideas for ads and how I get some of my content ideas for my podcast as well. So let's not waste any more time and dive right in. So guys, I get this question all the time, like, what types of content should I create? What should I create? And I talked a lot about this back on episode 54 as well. So if you guys want to go back and check out that episode as well, I'm going to do just a little bit deeper dive here on types of content that you should be creating for ads and things like that. So recently, one of the things that I have learned about creating types of ad content is just making sure that your ad is very descriptive in the video. So for example, we have a product that we're marketing for, and it's a very small product, and it's a very small tool that you can use for a golfer. And so what I've learned about this type of product is you need to be very descriptive and show exactly how the product works. So being very detailed, and I mean very, very, very detailed, take it to a whole nother level of making sure that it's very descriptive on how the product works, whether that's putting arrows and text explaining what it is. Just be very descriptive as far as your ads go. Another thing I want to talk about that I've been doing some testing with as well is making sure that your content or your ads for Facebook and Instagram are squared. So it's 1080 by 1080 with banners at the top and below. I've talked about this before on this podcast. But again, this is taking your ad to the next level as far as being very descriptive on what you are offering in your ad. So I was talking with my new employee, and we were just talking about creating ads and things like that. And I have the 5-second rule, right? On your website, making sure that right when someone comes to your website, you know in 5 seconds what we are actually talking about. And she was like, well, I actually think it's probably even faster on Instagram or Facebook. And that even like clicked or rang a bell for me, right? So like for your ads, within like 2 seconds, they need to know exactly what your product or service is inside of that ad once you're scrolling. So those are just some tips and tricks that I've thought about there. Now, as far as like podcast content and things like that, all I do on this podcast is anytime there's something new I'm learning or anything like that, that is a piece of content that I am creating. And so the big thing I would say is always ask a question, and your piece of content is the answer. And so, for example, I was working with a guy, and he's trying to launch his podcast. And I said, what questions do you get asked all the time? And that is the type of content that you need to be creating for your ads, for your blogs. And I'm a huge believer in being efficient with creating that type of content. So in all honesty, when I first started this podcast, I would record audio on a handheld recorder, and then I would go back and create content for YouTube. And to me, that was just, I was like double crossing the content. And that's why I've gone more to this format. I shoot a video for Facebook and YouTube, and then I take my audio and I post it on my podcast. I use Buzzsprout, like I've said, and then I take that and I post it on my blog. And so I'm just hitting all of this across the board as fast as possible and as efficient as possible as I can be. So think about that, guys and girls, when you guys are thinking about creating content. How can I be more efficient with creating my content? What works for me? And then just always creating content about questions that have been asked. And the other thing I want you guys to take into consideration as well is you might say, well, I already created a piece of content like this. Like a year ago, right? So now I'm on episode 54, and that was who knows how long ago. Like, I just passed my 2-year mark with this podcast, so congratulations to me. I've been consistent with this podcast for 2 years. And sometimes you have to bring those topics back around and bring those topics back up. Don't be afraid to do that. We need to be reminded all the time different things. Why do we read books that are similar? Why do we do those types of things? It's because sometimes we need to be reminded about like what we're actually focusing on and what we're trying to do. So even though we might know that, sometimes we need to remember just that little thing. So don't be afraid to create the same content again, is something else I will say. So thanks, guys, for listening and watching this podcast, episode 162 of the Marketing Lyfe Podcast. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at taylortimothy.com or localdma.com as well. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a marvelous day, and hopefully you guys continue producing the results that you're looking for. So thanks, guys, and gonna wrap this one up. Peace.